Black Star Pirate Radio.
In Oranjezicht, we're reading 59 degrees Fahrenheit with sunny. Wind check, southwest at 2 miles an hour. The neon tube flickers, the colour of a wound that won't close, and the room holds its breath for a second.
Antennas humming, Togee. We've got a clean sweep across the gig passport mesh, picking up 5 new pop-up stages in the East End. Looks like the local signal radar is sparking some real movement, showing community nodes self-organizing with increasing frequency.
Confirmed. Venue registrations are up 7% this month across the city, mostly independent spaces bypassing the usual booking agencies. Forms stamped, ready for the digital passport stamps, validating microeconomies flourishing outside the established frameworks.
Switching frequencies. Next signal. A small snippet. What pubs make of Burnham's.
My custom meters show a distinct surge in localized data packets. More engagement with the Black Star Radio program forum, too, particularly around discussions of civic autonomy and economic self-determination. We're tracking a few key policy movements that ripple right back to individual and collective sovereignty, testing the very foundations of our chosen architectures.
Let's dive into the first ripple, the question of who pays for urban vibrancy, specifically Burnham's £100 million rates giveaway for pubs. This is a classic example of a policy attempting to address a structural issue with a superficial fix.
Concrete facts. Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham proposed a £100 million plan to cap business rates for pubs, restaurants, and other hospitality venues at 2017 levels for the next 5 years, aiming to mitigate rising operational costs like energy and supply chain inflation. While presented as a lifeline for the struggling hospitality sector, the crucial detail is that this £100 million is not centrally funded. It's contingent on a successful bid to the government's Levelling Up Fund. If the bid fails, local councils already strained are expected to absorb the cost, exposing them to a significant revenue shortfall. This affects over 3,000 licensed premises, from historic inns to modern eateries, but also every taxpayer and public service in the region.
This feels like a classic trolley problem for local economies, or perhaps a shell game with public funds. Burnham's move aims to protect the visible cultural face of the high street, the pub, the cafe, a vital third space that fosters community. However, by potentially shifting the financial burden onto local councils without guaranteed central funding, it risks silently bleeding municipal services. It's like shoring up the facade of a cherished building while the foundations of public transport, social care, or education face an unfunded mandate. It creates a perceived benefit for one sector by potentially diminishing the structural integrity of others, forcing a zero-sum calculation where collective well-being should be prioritized.
Patching in a caller, the pattern auditor. You're on the signal.
By a pre-recorded segment, edited for flow. If Burnham's plan protects pubs, who ultimately subsidizes that protection? Does the average resident see their council tax rise, or do other vital services get cut to cover the £100 million gap?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
A more structurally sound alternative path would be a tiered relief system directly linked to a venue's local sourcing or community engagement metrics, rather than a blanket cap. Imagine a progressive discount for businesses that commit to purchasing a minimum percentage of goods from local producers, offering spaces for community events, or providing fair wage employment and training. This would reward businesses that actively contribute to the local circular economy and civic architecture, placing the onus on a proven, measurable community value rather than just blanket protection that might benefit large chains as much as struggling independents. Such a system would encourage provenance and local self-sufficiency.
The chosen next move, from our perspective, involves local communities forming pub preservation covenants through the gig passport mesh. These aren't just petitions. They are digitally notarized, transparent agreements where community members pledge patronage and volunteer support in exchange for verifiable commitments from venues. This could include pledges of increased local employment, cultural programming, or even shared equity models, all designed to negotiate direct rate reductions with councils. This approach leverages public support, embeds explicit consent and shared responsibility, and demonstrates the inherent value of these spaces, bypassing central government promises and building resilient civic architecture from the ground up.
From pub rates to academic audits, we shift focus. Julian Lisa, an Australian MP, is calling for university courses covering Israel-Palestine to be audited, raising serious questions about intellectual autonomy and the integrity of knowledge.
The facts are clear. Julian Lisa, a Liberal MP and former Shadow Attorney General, told a royal commission investigating anti-Semitism that university courses on Israel-Palestine should be audited for improper bias and anti-Semitism. He cited concerns that such courses could contribute to an atmosphere of fear and hostility towards Jewish students, even claiming his own son was afraid to attend synagogues. This demand directly exposes academics and students in Middle Eastern studies programs across Australian universities, potentially chilling open discourse, critical analysis, and academic freedom. The proposed audit mechanism itself, undefined but implied to be government-led or government-sanctioned, lacks transparent criteria, raising fears of politically motivated censorship rather than genuine academic review.
This demand for audits echoes historical attempts to control narratives in education, turning intellectual spaces into battlegrounds for political agendas, much like the Soviet-era attempts to dictate historical interpretation or McCarthy-era purges. It's a move that seeks to replace nuanced, multi-perspective teaching with a singular, state-approved framework, undermining the very principle of a university as a site for challenging ideas. Who carries this next? It's the students and faculty whose research, teaching methodologies, and even personal perspectives are now implicitly under a magnifying glass, fostering an environment of self-censorship and eroding the structural integrity of academic inquiry. It's a direct assault on the autonomy of thought.
Signal coming in. Patching in a caller. Go ahead.
Via pre-recorded segment, edited for flow. What's the real cost of auditing academic content? Doesn't it just create an environment of fear? And isn't that a form of censorship, regardless of the stated intention?
A viable alternative to government-mandated audits would be strengthening existing university ombudsman offices, or establishing independent, peer review panels composed of international academics from diverse backgrounds and expertise. These bodies could address specific complaints of bias through established academic protocols, ensuring due process, transparent investigation, and maintaining institutional autonomy and scholarly integrity. Such a system would prioritize academic rigor and freedom of inquiry, rather than succumbing to political pressure that treats complex subjects as simple binaries, fostering an environment of trust and dignity for all involved.
The playable next step here involves students and faculty initiating syllabus provenance projects. They can collectively document the sources, methodologies, and diverse perspectives within their courses, creating a public, transparent, and digitally verifiable record of academic rigor. This acts as a counter-archive, turning the demand for audits into an opportunity to expose the depth and breadth of their research, not suppress it. By openly publishing their syllabi, reading lists, and pedagogical approaches via secure, decentralized platforms, they assert the provenance of their knowledge and the dignity of their intellectual labor, building a resilient architecture of academic freedom that is self-validating rather than externally policed.
A strong defense of academic architecture. Now, from domestic discourse to international trade, Asian allies are pushing back against Trump's forced labor tariffs, revealing the complex interplay of ethics, economics, and national sovereignty.
The concrete situation. President Trump has floated a proposal for a sweeping 100% tariff on goods from China if they are deemed to use forced labor, a policy he says could extend to other nations. This is a dramatic escalation, designed to restore a protectionist regime after his earlier levies were struck down. Crucially, Asian allies like South Korea, Vietnam, and Taiwan, while agreeing on the moral imperative to combat forced labor, are pushing back. Their concern isn't the principle, but the sweeping, unilateral nature of such tariffs and their potential to arbitrarily disrupt established global supply chains, costing them access to critical markets and materials. This exposes manufacturers, exporters, and ultimately consumers in allied nations to significant economic volatility and uncertainty, destabilizing carefully constructed trade relationships.
This move is a geopolitical Rorschach test. While framed as a human rights initiative, a moral imperative to address forced labor, it's perceived by allies as a blunt instrument of economic leverage, a trade war tactic disguised as ethical policing. It risks alienating vital partners by forcing them to choose between economic stability within the U.S. orbit and managing complex established regional trade networks, creating a new Great Wall of tariffs instead of fostering cooperative solutions. It's an attempt to dictate global supply chain architecture through coercion rather than consent, inadvertently punishing those who are already attempting to navigate complex ethical landscapes. It's a structural disruption masquerading as a solution.
Lines open.
Via pre-recorded segment edited for flow. If the goal is genuinely to stop forced labor, do these tariffs actually solve the problem? Or do they just shift the supply chain issues and punish allied economies without addressing the root cause?
An alternative to blanket, unilateral tariffs would involve strengthening multilateral agreements and international inspection regimes, like those championed by the International Labor Organization, ILO. This would focus on verifiable, transparent supply chain auditing and remediation programs, rather than punitive measures that can harm unintended parties and disrupt entire economies. Such an approach would involve collaborative data sharing, independent third-party verification, and support for on-the-ground labor rights initiatives. This fosters consent and shared responsibility among trading partners, building a global trade architecture based on mutual accountability and dignity, rather than unilateral dictates.
The chosen next move for these Asian allies could be to collaboratively develop and launch a provenance blockchain ledger for goods. This distributed, immutable system would offer an independently verifiable record of labor practices, environmental impact, and material sourcing from raw material to finished product. Each step in the supply chain would be cryptographically linked, creating a transparent, auditable history that demonstrates ethical sourcing. This effectively creates an alternative, transparent trade architecture that bypasses the need for unilateral tariffs by proactively demonstrating provenance and ethical adherence, asserting their sovereignty in trade, and providing a clear signal of dignity in their manufacturing processes.
Same dossier, new angle. Keep the thread tight.
Agency.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.